I think it's just about building over time small little wins. I'm a big fan of, slow and steady wins the wellness race. And, just kind of that old, proverb of, the turtle and the hare. And, I look at it as, the hare went so fast, tried to do all this stuff, he burned himself out, but that turtle just kept, slowly going along. And that's really how I look at it, right? Building what works for you brick by brick. And if you are really busy or you're going through a time in your life, really just finding little ways to weave it in. I always tell people, having what I like to call pockets of self care. I'm a big believer that something is better than nothing. I mean, to me, all these different little wins can give you a little bit more harmony. And really kind of just over time, it gets easier to add more things in.
Welcome to Beyond Better, a podcast that explores a simple but profound idea. We all deserve to live lives we love, and that includes our work lives too. I'm your host, Stacey Ennis, an author, book coach, speaker, and long-time location-independent entrepreneur living in Portugal with my family of 4. Join me as I talk business, location independence, writing, publishing, and so much more, all focused on building a life that is beyond better. Welcome. I am really excited this week to get to talk about a topic that is a huge part of my life, but not something I spend a lot of time talking about on the podcast, which is wellness. For my family, we went on a wellness journey starting a couple years back, and it's been really hard actually, but very rewarding to really revamp our entire lifestyle, from the pots we were cooking in to the food that we're eating to how we're taking care of ourselves and paying attention to our nervous systems. And because I've seen such a drastic change, when I heard about this guest this week, I knew that I had to have her on because I want more people to know about how to integrate wellness into their lives, especially for those of you who are really high performers. So for me, as somebody who, I could tend toward overwork. I would be the kind of person that if I didn't have a family, I would be working super late on the weekends. I really have to rein it in. It's something I have to be really mindful about. And I know that a lot of our listeners are just like me. And this week's guest will, I hope, really speak to you and help you think about wellness in a really holistic way. So let me introduce you to this week's guest. Erin Clifford is a national certified counselor, certified as a holistic wellness coach through the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. She holds the highest credential in wellness coaching as a national board certified health and wellness coach. Erin serves as managing director at Clifford Law Offices, providing her with an understanding of the stressors that a high demanding job entails, allowing her to offer tailored solutions that address both the personal and professional demands of her clients, helping them thrive in all aspects of their lives. She is the author of Wellness Reimagined, a holistic approach to health, happiness, and harmony. Erin, welcome. I'm so glad to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here.
I would love for you to share your wellness origin story. I know from your book that you grew up with exercise and wellness as part of your life, but you had an experience in your early adulthood that was really formative in how you think about wellness today. Can you share a bit of that backstory?
Sure. So growing up, I was super into wellness, just growing up in my home. My parents were both avid exercisers. My grandmother was a cook. I mean, she just made everything from scratch. And so I really got into wellness. And then when I went to college, I, started living on my own for the first time. And I was really struggling with my emotional health, which, this is all in retrospect, right? At the time when I was a teenager and it kind of started in high school and then went into college, I really didn't know how to deal with my emotions. So I started using food to deal with them. And that sort of created a vicious cycle where I ended up developing bulimia nervosa, having an anxiety disorder, and I ended up taking some time off from school, which was really difficult because, all my friends were graduating and I ended up having to go to treatment. But looking back on it now, it really just saved my life and really changed the direction of what I do all the time, because I just realized how important wellness is. And so when I first graduated from college, I ended up teaching high school in the Chicago public schools. And I noticed that a lot of my students were really struggling with their wellness, and so were their families. They didn't have access to healthy foods. They didn't really, they were working so much. A lot of the parents, they weren't able to make a lot of time for themselves. And then when I eventually went to law school, I saw the same thing when I graduated with all of the attorneys. So, totally two different, groups of people that were all struggling with the same thing. And so that was what really inspired me to go back and become a health and wellness coach, and then eventually go and get a master's in mental health counseling. But I really bring something unique to my practice, and that I look at wellness on different levels. It's not just about the physical health. We really have to tap into the mental health, the emotional health, and spiritual health. So when I'm working with someone on making a program, I encompass all of those different things, because I know for myself, if I don't do that, I can easily slip back into, a space that I don't want to be in.
Yeah. I love the vulnerability of your story. I mean, sharing all that you went through, and then, the way that you were able to come back around and think about wellness in this holistic way. And I promise we'll come back to the work that you do today, but I would love to touch on your experience as a young adult, because when I read that in your book about your experience developing your eating disorder, I instantly thought of my 12-year-old. And, we in our household, as I've mentioned, we are so wellness focused. And I have always hoped that, the way that we eat, we cook from scratch, we make our own yogurt and kombucha, like we do all the things, and we really celebrate food as well. Like we love eating, we love that experience. And I've always kind of hoped that that healthy um, orientation to a healthful lifestyle will carry with her when she gets into college. But, when I was reading your story, I started to think about how much there's so much beyond just the food itself, and the exercise and the healthy eating and that emotional wellness that you mentioned. And I wonder, because I know we have a lot of parents that listen to this too, or people that love, young women especially are susceptible to developing eating disorders and things like that. When you look back on that experience, and I know your parents were so intentional and so caring, your grandma was involved, but obviously there was something that wasn't in their awareness that they could have done for you, probably, that would have supported you. And I'm curious if you have any insights that you can share about that with our listeners, just to think about that whole picture for young women.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I sort of think about now is when I was a kid, I got burned out from stuff. We always nowadays, we want to give our kids every opportunity in the entire world. And, kids are involved in sports, they're involved in obviously their academics, all the different extracurricular activities. Growing up, I got involved in theater. I did some professional theater in Chicago, and I was really into all of that, but to the point where I really feel like I burned myself out. And I didn't know how to explain that to my parents, because I didn't really have that voice as a teenager, as a kid. And so, I think the one thing I would say with parents when is to really just, talk with your kids all the time, make sure that, they are getting out and enjoying things, but helping them find the things that they enjoy as opposed to expecting them to do everything. I also think I love the one thing you said, that you're like cooking together and doing stuff like that together. Because I think like to really get a healthy nutrition, it's so good to, actually take that time as your family and, do those things together. But, having some wiggle room, right, to have, because to me, healthy food it's, all the whole foods, right? Fruits, vegetables, obviously we want to eat as unprocessed as we can, but it's also once in a while, someone might want a slice of chocolate birthday cake, and, being okay with that, I think can be helpful. And, really just, being there for each other and watching all the social media. I mean, I feel so blessed that growing up, like I didn't have all of that social media around me, but I know now, even when I go in, sometimes I'll do some coaching stuff with teenagers that, that's really hard for them because, you're always constantly comparing yourself to other people. So I just think a big thing is really having that, communication, allowing each child to be unique and not, trying to push a lot of things on, to all of your kids.
Hmm. Those are such great points. And I was just talking with a friend about this today and how much, our preteens and teens are getting exposed to, you can't control everything that they're
Mhm.
getting exposed to. And even my 12-year-old, she doesn't have a smartphone, but literally everyone else does. So she's still seeing, all of this stuff, and we can't always be over her shoulder. So I love that open communication approach. We also share that I was a high school language arts teacher. You taught high school. And so I often think about that too, with how much, just remembering my teaching days, how much my students dealt with and struggled with. And yet, like, blackberries were just becoming a thing when I was teaching in the Caribbean. So yeah, I can't imagine navigating that today. Okay, I promised I would bring us back around to your current work. And one of the words that you use is harmony. And it's interesting because when I was getting ready for this interview, it's interesting that that word came up because that is my word for the year for my family. It's harmony. My sister even sent me this magnet that's on my fridge now that says harmony on it, 2025. And so it's a word that's really guiding my life. It's also guiding me at work, but it's a real anchor for my life. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about this concept of harmony through your lens and how that can offer a more sustainable path for professionals.
Yeah, so I, work with a lot of professionals. I'm a professional, and for years, I've been in this the wellness space over a decade now. And everyone always talks about, I'm going to help you have more work life balance. And as I went through my practice and just really developed myself, I was getting busier with things I was doing. I thought, you know what, this does not work. Like, there's actually no such thing as having that perfect work life balance. But what can we, strive for? And that's sort of where that harmony came in. Growing up, I used to sing, and so I did choir, and I love the idea of like harmonizing notes together. And so that's sort of how I started looking at life domains. I'm not. How hard is it if you took a scale, right, to try to put those marbles on and make everything perfect all the time? That's not going to happen. And so instead of thinking about, balancing work and your personal life, your family, your self care, your contribution to the world, all the different things that we want to do as having that perfect balance and percentage points, thinking about it as just having harmony and figure out ways to intertwine everything together. If somebody, for instance, is, if you're a busy mom out there, and you've got a job that you really love and you don't want to give that up, but you also want to make sure you're spending a lot of time with your family, how can you sort of make those things work for you? Sitting at the dinner table and, putting those phones away, making sure you strategically use all that, PTO or vacation time that you have. And when it comes to a wellness program, I always recommend figuring out ways to intertwine it throughout your routines and throughout your day, because a lot of times, there's a lot of strict, I think, wellness programs out there, some of which I like, but anytime I've tried to do them or my clients have tried to, it really becomes almost like a second job. So I'm really all about, having that harmony and figuring out how can we just make things work for all of us, because each and every person has different values, different things that are important to them. And so you should be able to take that concept and make it work for you.
Hmm. I love all of what you just said. And this is also why I sometimes struggle with like bro habit culture, because there's this idea that we have to do things in such a regimented way, like get up at 4 and do your ice bath and, do this and do that. And it's like so regimented that it becomes, like you said, it's like not just a job, but it's kind of like ruling your whole life. And you mentioned the flexibility with food earlier, which there's a term metabolic flexibility, which is this concept for anybody who's not familiar that you eat healthfully most of the time. So when you do something that's kind of outside of that healthful range, your body's able to handle it. And I think about that with wellness habits as well, that like if you have this maintenance that you're doing on a regular basis, you're exercising regularly, you're normally getting sleep. When you have moments that maybe it doesn't fit as well, like you're traveling or things like that, you have some flexibility that you've built in because you do have this basis of health. One thing I'd love to dig into a little deeper, because I can almost hear listeners' thoughts going, oh, but I'm a single mom, or I have a child with special needs, or, I'm widowed and I have this thing going on. Like there's so many things that somebody might be a caretaker for their parents. They may have extraordinary demands on their time and also be a high achiever and really like I, personally, I gain a lot of joy out of my work and achieving in my work. And I know a lot of our listeners do too. So, how would you speak to somebody who's listening to that idea of harmony and going, that sounds really cool, but how is that possible in my life?
I think it's just about building over time small little wins. I'm a big fan of, slow and steady wins the wellness race. And, just kind of that old, proverb of, the turtle and the hare. And, I look at it as, the hare went so fast, tried to do all this stuff, he burned himself out, but that turtle just kept, slowly going along. And that's really how I look at it, right? Building what works for you brick by brick. And if you are really busy or you're going through a time in your life, I have a lot of friends we're in that like sandwich generation, right? You're taking care of kids, you're taking care of parents, and you're working and you love your job. And there's all these different things that you have going on. So really just finding little ways to weave it in. I always tell people, having what I like to call pockets of self-care. So instead of thinking like, what, I don't have time to get, that 150 minutes of exercise in that they, tell me that I need, right, for my health. But, that doesn't necessarily, exercise doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to the gym and getting a formal workout in. It might just mean I'm going to, pick up the pace a little bit when I take my dog for a walk, or, I walk to and from the train station, or I'm going to park farther in that parking lot, or I'm going to just kind of shorten things. I'm a big believer that something is better than nothing. Even if you don't, just getting up and doing some like stretching or doing a breath work exercise for like a few minutes can be great. And even we've been talking a bunch about nutrition, just making those extra little choices. Maybe I'm really craving that, burger, but I'm going to have a salad with it instead of the fries. I mean, to me, all these different little wins can give you a little bit more harmony, and, and really kind of just over time, it gets easier to add more things in.
Mm. And there's reciprocity, I think, in these efforts because when you are integrating this in a more holistic way that's also reasonable with your lifestyle and the stage that you're in, you start to feel better, and then that motivates you to keep those habits up. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, and I think too, there's a mindset thing to it. I mean, some of us just go through a challenging period. There might be people listening to this that are like, you know what, I'm just right now, whatever's going on in my personal life or in my work life or both is just kind of really challenging. And just, giving yourself some grace and self compassion that's okay. If at this point in your life you're struggling to, kind of add some of these different things in, and just, realizing that like this is a period, and, how can you, as you're forward, moving forward and thinking about stuff, thinking about little ways that you can support yourself.
Hmm. Would you be willing to share either a personal story or a client story about somebody who was in that like hair mentality and you were able to help them refocus and become that tortoise that was able to, live a much more holistic, well life?
Yeah, I have several clients that are coming to mind. One of my favorite clients I've worked with was really kind of just at at like a weird time in her life. Her kids were all just going to college, and she had taken her business to like a whole new level. And she was working nonstop, but it was something she loved and she was really excited about. And, then she went for her yearly physical and found out she had diabetes. And she was just so overwhelmed by this because she's like, you know what? I just finally got my business where I want it to be. I have a little bit more time to work on that because my kids are, going away to school. She had a grandkid actually as well on the way. And she's like, man, like I am just, I'm feeling a little depressed. I'm trying to figure out, how to make all of this work. And I felt like she had no time to really, take care of herself. And so when we started working together, it was really about just kind of doing a few simple things. I think sometimes when anyone gets diagnosed with a medical condition, if they have a good doctor, they'll give them like a nice, right, lifestyle plan and kind of point them in the direction. And then they come home with it and they're like, I don't know what to do. This is, how do I make this work? I have this huge life that I'm trying to navigate. And so what she did was she started just slowly adding stuff in. She got up 20 minutes earlier and she did a little bit of just exercise bands, or she'd go for a little bit of a walk. I kind of came up with just simple little things that she could bring with her to work, to eat, that were healthy. And we actually started by her just taking a little bit of a lunch. I just said, okay, if you're going to be working 24/7, you're working when you get home back at night. I'm like, can we give you like a half hour just so you're going to take a lunch? And so she started just sitting and like having her food. And then some days she'd get up and go walk around the parking lot outside at her office. And that eventually turned into, she took a full hour for herself because she's like, I need that time during the day. And then after a few months, she was like, you know what, I'm going to kind of she found apps she liked on her phone. And she started getting into a little bit more time for exercise because she was able to kind of manage her sleep better. So it really just started with these small little things. But she had that, she really had a why. Why she wanted to do these things. She's like, I want to be here for my kids and my family, for my grandkids, for all of my patients as she was growing her business. And it really kind of got her going. And, what was interesting was at one point she kind of backtracked a little bit. And she had a bit of a hurdle and, kind of was really beating herself up. And I said to her, I'm like, look, the reason I said we've got to work together for this many months was because I knew this was going to happen, right? This always happens for all of us, but it's how can we persevere and get through that hurdle and realize that, again, that's where that grace and self-compassion comes in, that I can just kind of lean in back into it. I mean, so I think that's really for anybody listening who's like, I feel like I don't have time to do this. I don't know what to do. Just lean into it. View it like that. I'm going to lean into having a little more harmony. I'm going to lean into having a little bit more wellness, because that's just a gentle way of getting some back in. That's just going to support you.
I love that story because I think that that's really shared by a lot of people, this experience of whether you have a health crisis or you just kind of have a moment where you're like, I really need to make a change here. And it made me think of when I was in my 20s, I had just a bunch of gastrointestinal issues. And later, I now understand it was stress related, but at the time, nobody was asking me about my stress or emotional health or anything. It was just very like anatomy focused. And so I went to a number of doctors. I had like the endoscopy, enteroscopy, and colonoscopy. I did all the things. I got really expensive medication. And then I saw a naturopath also, along with all of the stuff. And I remember he gave me this like food plan to go to the grocery store. And I remember just going to the store and like staring at this list and walking up and down the aisles and going, what am I going to eat? Like, I can't have this and I can't have this. And I didn't stick with it. Like, I went home, I tried to make chicken with no anything on it because I didn't really understand the rules. And I think that a lot of people feel like that. It's like, rather than just taking it a little bit at a time and adjusting one thing and getting good at that, and then making this adjustment, to your point, like taking a 30-minute lunch was revolutionary for her.
Yeah.
And that was her first step. And then she was able to expand it, getting up 20 minutes earlier. That made a huge difference for her. And then once she got that habit established, she was able to make real progress. I would love, I know there are listeners that are like, that's what I want. I want to be able to make these changes, and this feels way more accessible. And I would love for you to share how they could go about starting to implement some of this. I know you talk about SMART goals in how you orient around wellness. So I don't know if you'd want to start there, if there's maybe some simple get started tips. I'll give it to you to answer that how you wish.
Sure. So I think if you're getting started, the first thing I would say, be really specific. If you have a certain goal, making sure you're specific about it. And I always recommend, just starting with something small, that's attainable. So, like maybe, we've talked obviously about nutrition a bunch. So maybe you're like, I want to improve my nutrition a little bit, and I would think about, what do you want to do? Perhaps you're like, what, my main goal is I just want to add in 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. Right? That's like a simple little way to crowd in some more healthy things. And why do you want to do that? Right? What is the real reason you want to do this? Maybe it's because you want to feel better and perform better. Is it, because you feel like you've got some kind of health crisis going on? Is it like a confidence thing? You're trying to get in some shape? And what's underneath that too, just like with my client, she's like, man, I want to be here for my family. That's a huge why. And so if you can figure out why you want to do something, when you have those moments where you're like, oh, I just want to grab the potato chips and not have, right, the vegetables, it can kind of help you through them. Or no big deal if you do grab the potato chips, but you're able to get yourself back on track. So you want to find a why. You want to find a way to track it. So if I'm going to have 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, I want to make sure I'm getting those in. So am I taking like a little habit tracker on a piece of paper and checking it off? I had a really fun CEO client once that he loved as a kid. He had like these star stickers he would put on chores when he got them done. So we created that for him around his habits.
I love
right?
that.
And it was so like, I'm all about like, let's have some fun with this, right? Wellness should be like a positive thing. So however you want to track stuff, and then you want to have an action plan. Like, how are you going to make this happen? So if I want to have 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, maybe I'm going to build out some other habits here. So I'm going to make sure that on the weekends, I either go to the grocery store, I go to the farmer's market, get things delivered, whatever it is you do to get your groceries, that you're going to make that happen. I'm going to also on that day, I'm going to spend some time cleaning and cutting everything up and putting it in maybe containers so you've got it easily available to you. And then I'm going to make sure I pack it with me every day when I go to the office, right? Those are 3 different things that I've got going on for me. So I have that stuff available during the week. So you really need to kind of build out that action plan. And I'm also going to, when I build that action plan, think about any hurdles. What might get in the way of this? It's probably going to happen. We're all humans. And so just knowing that when it does happen, you'll be like, okay, I knew that was going to happen. I can move past that, right? Maybe it's I'm too lazy on the weekends and I don't want to go shopping. And then I start my week off and I don't have access to things. Or I'm really stressed out and I might not eat that stuff that I brought with me to the office, right? So you want to just kind of prepare for that stuff. And you want to make sure whatever you plan is realistic, right? Is this something that I have the finances to do right now, that I have the time to do? Because if you feel like, you know what, I don't know if that's achievable, then pick something else, right? We want to set ourselves up for success when we start off right off the bat. I see that a lot too around like exercise. Sometimes people will have like this huge exercise plan and then they're like, is this achievable? And they're like, well, maybe I should start a little smaller. That's fine, right? Because we build our goals over time. And so then when you figure all of that out, you want to give yourself that time allotment. I'm going to try this for a month. I'm going to try this for 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. And then you reevaluate. Is this working for me? And you're like, you know what? This has been working great the last 3 months. I've gotten all these different, almost every day I've had like my servings of fruits and vegetables. I'm feeling great. That's the time you want to add another habit in, right? We want to set another goal. So it's just really being, consistent with everything and planning it out. And if after like a month, 6 months, 3 months, whatever it is, you're like, I don't think this worked. Figuring out why it didn't work, non-judgmentally. Right? Even myself, sometimes I will get off track with my wellness programs or my wellness plans or something I want to do. I just doesn't work for me. And I just, instead of beating myself up, which is what I used to do when I was younger, I just kind of reevaluate and start from there.
I like that. I mean, that self-compassion, which is a phrase you've mentioned a couple of times, I think is so important. And as you stack all of these habits over time, eventually it becomes a lifestyle. And I know when we got started with our nutrition, so we were already very like exercise focused family. It's been part of my husband and I have been together for a very long time now. We've, our kids and our family life is very outdoorsy and exercise focused. And we were like kind of with the food stuff, but not really fully. And it was really hard at first. Like it was so hard and it required a whole different like culture change in our family to really adopt this new lifestyle. For us, there was a medical need that was associated with it. So I think, and it was for one of my children. So if it had been for me, I'm not sure I would have, that was very motivating. That was my why. But what's interesting is that now we kind of started all of this about 4 years ago, and then we took a different approach about 2 years ago that was much more intense. And it was very intense at first, and it's still a lot of work, but it's so integrated into our lifestyle that like it's our choice, like we prefer it now. And it really is like I couldn't even imagine going back to the way that we did things before. But I would have never believed that probably in the beginning because I was like, oh my God, this is so much work. It's so hard. But it's like also the time. I think that's the thing I'm hearing from you too. We get into certain situations in our professional lives, in our personal lives, in our health over a long period of time. And if you just jump in and you're trying to fix everything in a week or a month, you're going to be
Mhm.
that hairy. You're going to like burn out and quit the race. I'm sure that many of your clients have tried that in the past and that has not worked for them. And so I love that you have this kind of slower approach. And maybe for somebody that's in the middle of this and kind of hitting those bumps, what are some of the things that you might offer them as they're like trying to continue their path of wellness?
Yeah, I just think, kind of just reevaluating and just realizing that there's, little wins really do count. I mean, I
Stars.
work,
I
you
like
know,
that.
I work
Yeah.
with like a lot of like high level professionals, and they always want to do, and I get it because I can be very type A too. You want to do more, and so sometimes, we do actually, in my family's law firm, I do some wellness coaching, and we always do different like habit challenges. And when I first started doing this, some of the attorneys would, they were supposed to pick one habit, right, for a couple of months that they wanted to work on. Some of them would pick like four, and
I
then
knew
these
where
were
this was going. Yep. A bunch of
these were
attorneys.
yeah, these were the people that were not successful right at the end of like the 6 week period, and they're like, I don't know, and I'm like, I told you to pick one, right? And so I'm like, everyone who picked one, did a pretty good job. And like some of them had like an off couple days or an off week, but we were able to get back on track. So I think part of it is just don't overwhelm yourself. I mean, like, even you, Stacey, you said like we didn't start off doing all of these things. When people look at me, they're like, man, you do like a lot. You've got all this stuff like in your life that you do for your wellness. I didn't have all of this stuff 10 years ago. It was sort of like, and some of it's trial and error, like what works for me, what works for my body, what works for my time at this point in my life. And I just started slowly building upon things. I mean, so that's what I would say. Don't try to do too much. And like, if you feel like things aren't working, I would take a step back and be like, am I trying to do too much? Like, even if it's just, I'm trying to work on my exercise. Are you trying to like do 5 or 6 days a week, or can we start with 2 or 3? I mean, because maybe eventually you can get to that 5 or 6 days a week if that's what you want. But if you start there, you're either going to burn yourself out, or you're going to have weeks where it's not possible, and then you're not going to know what to do. And it can be hard when you get in those moments to then get back on track.
It's so true. And I also think it's how you orient to the journey as well. I like that you focus on keeping that why in view. The other thing I was thinking about is that, and you made this point, you touched on this earlier, that exercise doesn't have to look a certain way. Even before this conversation, I try to take a 2-hour lunch every day. This is just like how I kind of split my day in half so that I'm really refreshed for the second half. And before this conversation, I went on a hike with a friend. That's how we caught up. Instead of, sitting and having coffee for that period, we went and hiked out in the sunshine. So there's so many ways that you can integrate it that doesn't have to look like get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go to the gym. It can be really integrated into your lifestyle as well.
Yeah. You can split it up, if you have to. I sometimes just get my cardio in by just walking my dog Daisy. I have a golden retriever, and my favorite thing to do for that is, for cardio is really just to take her, for some walks. And I do have, like, for me, like, I have some orthopedic issues now, with my knees, so I can't go as far as I used to. So, my PT guy was like, well, just do, because it was really frustrating my knees, like, just do smaller walks. So now we kind of break them up. I might do, 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes, when I get back from the office, which is a great way for me to transition, and then I just work on getting a little Pilates, a little strength training, and those things I go to the studio for. But some weeks I can't get it all in. And you know what I do those weeks? I go downstairs and I maybe take my exercise bands, which, I got really cheaply on Amazon, and I do like 20 minutes of that strength training. So I just try to kind of integrate how I get stuff in. But that's a really something for me that took a long time, because when I had my eating disorder, I also really kind of had an exercise, disorder around it too. I was over exercising. And even when I got healthy with my food stuff, I kept that going for a long time. So for me now, I really just try to remember, you got to take care of yourself. Like, in some days, if I'm really sore or my knees are bothering me, I might just go stretch and then go in the sauna or take a bath. That's part of wellness too. There might be some weeks where even if you have the time, pushing yourself to do certain things is not something you want to do.
Mm. That intuition and listening to your own body, and I think also trusting your body and what it's telling you. For me, I've had to learn that also with
Mhm.
food. And it's interesting because I notice as the month, and I'm sure it's connected also to my menstrual cycle, that there's certain times that I'm like craving a food like chocolate, for example, and I can eat that chocolate and feel good, and like my body wants that. But then other times if I have it, it doesn't sit well. Like maybe I get a headache from the sugar or something like that. And I think it's the same with exercise. Like I'm a runner, and there's certain days that I'm like, I don't feel like that run's gonna feel good today. And then other days where I'm like, I don't feel like running, but I know I need it today. And just, I think when you have integrated that more holistically into your lifestyle, you start to learn and trust what your body needs. And then there's absolutely no guilt or shame attached to what would maybe be perceived as like slipping with your habits, because actually you're just honoring and trusting what your body needs in that moment or in that day.
Yeah, exactly. And that, that's one of those things that you just develop over time. And, just like anything. So, I mean, I think it's really about, starting off with that, intention of, I really do want to have more harmony in my life. I do want to work on my self care, my wellness. Here's why. And then just slowly integrating those things and really being aware of them. And, realizing you're going to be in a totally different place if you start now than you are a year from now and 2 years from now. And even sometimes that may include some setbacks because stuff happens in life, right? We go through different challenges, but as long as you stay kind of on that path and really just listen to what you need, because wellness isn't just about, right, as I said at the beginning, that physical stuff. I mean, I think if we can really look at our emotion, our mental, being mindful about it, it can really, transform us.
Mm. I love this topic. And it also reminded me of I just had this memory of this yoga class that I went to. And so I'm 39, and the woman that came in was probably in her like mid 20s, something like that. And we had a male yoga teacher, and she came in, she walked right up to him and she said, "I'm having really bad menstrual cramps today, so I may not participate fully in the class." And I was like, dang girl, I love that you just walked in and just said that. And you're like, this next generation, I love you. And I hope that we have more of this, just kind of like honoring of what our body needs, not pushing ourselves because we're in a space where we feel like we need to. So anyway, I loved that moment. I was like,
Great, because we really need to, like, whether it's like going into that exercise room or if you're with your doctor, like, question them, right? Like, ask questions and don't be afraid to be like, you know what, that's not working for me. And taking more ownership over those things. I know there's all these, like, I think sometimes we come in, whether it's the trainer or the doctor or the nutritionist, and we think they know everything. And while they are experts at what they do, they don't know our bodies like we know our bodies.
yeah, it's so true. It's so true. Okay, I do want to switch gears slightly, although we're still on the same topic because it's about your book. But because we have so many authors and aspiring authors that listen to this podcast, I have to ask you about your writing experience and this process of writing your book. I know it's such a huge undertaking. It's such a big effort and such a huge accomplishment. Most people that want to write a book and haven't yet gotten into that world have no idea how much is involved in the whole journey of writing, publishing, marketing. And in my view, it's a really beautiful process, but it is a lot. There is a lot involved in it. And I would love to know through this process of writing your book and sharing your book, if you had any insights or, any awareness or moments of clarity that you found through the process of bringing all of your knowledge or a lot of your knowledge in and packaging that up and offering it out into the world.
Yeah, like the writing process, like I loved it. I mean, this probably goes back to me being an English teacher.
Yeah.
I love to write. I actually like to do research, and so, but I think one of the biggest insights I noticed, because people asked me how long it took me, and so I'd been telling people, 2 years, because that's when I actually started actually physically, like, okay, here's the book. I'm going to start writing everything, and then there was the editing and publishing process. But it really took me 10 years to write this, because the stuff that's in this book is something I developed over the past 10 years when I was coaching, when I went back to school. Like a lot of the research in this book, I actually, when I was in school working on my master's for mental health counseling, I started realizing I really want to write a book. And so when I could, I would do a research project on a topic in the lifestyle space with mental health. So I was able to kind of use that and translate that into, parts of my book. Like I did my capstone project, which was my thesis on what do you need to eat to help, boost your mood and manage anxiety? Because that was just something I was really interested in, but I also knew that's going to end up in the book. So for me, it was really, I think, like a decade long journey. But then when I sat down and wrote it, I realized like how fun like the process was. I wrote it it's probably took me about 6 months just to kind of put everything down into paper. But then at that point, I was like, okay, I still need to build some stuff out. Like I felt like I needed some direction. So I ended up hiring an editor that helped me. And we went on a really fun journey because she said to me, she's like, Erin, I could just take this, but I think you have more books than you, which I think I do too. So she said, what I'd like to just go through each chapter. I'll give you notes and then kind of just rewrite it. And so that was a whole nother process, but that was like just so rewarding. Like it didn't even seem like work to me. And then my wonderful husband, he's a really good editor. He helped me in school with my research papers. So I would have him editing it before I was sending it back to her for like grammar and stuff like that. And so all of that, then I went got an independent publisher and then, kind of went through that whole process again. But the experience was really great. I think for me, the hardest part of it was kind of towards the end when we were getting towards like the end of the edits that had to go in and, trying to figure out how to like promote it and things like that, because I'm expending so much energy now, but I'm so excited about it because I love the product so much.
I love that you share that excitement with listeners because this is the thing that I find with my coaching clients, my own experience writing books, is that it is a huge effort, but it also can and should be really joyful, and it should let you discover new things through the process. It's very much a discovery, clarifying process, and that experience of real introspection and then pushing yourself to create something other people can understand and use that comes out of your own brain. I mean, it's kind of magic, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was interesting because, as you know from writing, like you edit different things so much, like separately. Like I hadn't actually read the thing together for a long time. So when I went and recorded the audiobook a few months ago, I was like in the middle of it, I just started crying because I was like, oh my goodness, like not only do I love this, but there's so much of me in it. In every chapter. And I feel like people get to really know me, which I thought was really special because I tried to do that, but like I couldn't tell till I put it all together.
Yeah, and you integrate a lot of storytelling into your book, which I'm that I can see that feeling of going, oh wow, I was able to really capture that. Oh, I love it, Erin. I'll end with our last question. Well, I will invite you also to tell us a little bit more about where to find you, but first, I'll ask you the question that we ask all of our amazing guests, and that is, if you could recommend one book to listeners, one that has profoundly impacted your life, what would it be?
So I'm going to go back to my English roots. The one book when I was a child that really transformed me was To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. And the reason I picked this book is because it really taught me the whole concept of empathy, which I think has just really helped me navigate the world. When Atticus tells Scout, sometimes you kind of have to put yourself in someone else's shoes and walk around a little bit. That concept, I just never forgot that. And that really helped me when I was going through challenging times. It really helps me navigate people when I work with them on a daily basis. And I just really, there was something about that just really resonated with me. And I am just a fan of all the old American classics. So.
I love it. I remember that book being very impactful for me as well when I read it. It was very emotionally charged. Just a great recommendation. Well, Erin, please tell our listeners, our viewers on YouTube, where to find you, where to follow you, where to get your book.
So my book is available, Wellness Reimagined, on Amazon and all the other major retailers too. You can also I really love putting stuff out on Instagram, Erin Wellness. I also have that page on Facebook and LinkedIn. But one of my favorite things to do is just share small little tips because I like little nuggets of things that you can do. So I would love it if people would join the community.
Lovely. Well, we'll be sure to include all of the links to places you mentioned in our show notes so listeners can really easily find you and follow along, get your book. Erin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to you, our listener, our viewers, for hanging out with us. I hope this was really inspiring for you. And if you are on a wellness journey or you want to be on a wellness journey, I hope that it has given you some practical tips and also hopefully some motivation to lean into whatever that next step is for you to get well, to feel good, and to live a more holistically well life. Thank you, as always, to Rita Dominguez for her production of this fine podcast. She truly makes it possible to get this out to you. I just show up and record, and she does all of the other hard work around it. And I am so grateful. If you're still listening, that means you must really like this podcast. So will you please take a moment to rate and review the show? It makes a huge difference in helping me reach more listeners with the message of living a life that's not just better, but beyond better. And I will be back with you before you know it.